All right, we're talking with Coast Guard veteran Jared Dillian of the Daily Dirtnap and the Be Smart podcast. So, Jared, thanks for being on the show today. Appreciate it. Look forward to talking about all the good stuff you're doing. I'd like to first start off and go back and tell us what you did in the Coast Guard.
Yeah, I graduated from the academy in 1996. I was assigned to what they call a medium endurance cutter out of Port Angeles, Washington. Did mostly fisheries enforcement, but also some counter drug and migrant stuff off of Mexico. I was a deck watch officer and a boarding officer. Also was the weapons officer on the ship. And from there, I went to Pacific Area Intelligence, where I was the fisheries analyst for the whole Coast Guard Pacific region. Um, did that for 3 years. That was actually a fantastic job. I love that a lot.
Huh.
One of the few places in the military where you can really use some creativity and be a problem solver and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And actually I did some cool stuff there and got a commendation medal in my second tour, which was kind of a big deal at the time. So
Awesome.
so from there, so while I was uh, at that station, I was getting my MBA part time at the University of San Francisco.
Okay.
I paid for it myself, so I wouldn't owe any time. And with my MBA, I got a job at Lehman Brothers in New York City, and I was a trader for 7 years. Did index arbitrage and ETF trading. Was had a successful Wall Street career, did really well, and then had the bankruptcy. I became a writer, and I've been writing a newsletter for the last 16 years. I've written 4 books. I have a fifth one coming out in November. Been an opinion columnist at Bloomberg and Forbes and a bunch of other places. Done a lot of stuff. So,
Wow. That's awesome. So, with the Lehman Brothers bankruptcy, you kind of were thrust into entrepreneurship. Had you thought about running your own business at some point in the past, or was it just something you kind of fell into?
I kind of fell into it. So while I was at Lehman, I was writing market commentary
Hmm.
and it became really popular. I had like a few thousand people on my list. And I said, I can make a business out of this. I could, turn this into like a newsletter and sell subscriptions. So, in the beginning, I started the business during the financial crisis, which is a hell of a time to start a business. But I did pretty well the first year, and it's grown significantly since then, and now it's a great business. So.
Huh. So, talk to us a little bit about the Daily Dirt Nap.
Yeah, that's a newsletter. So I've been doing that since October of 2008. It's intended for, sophisticated investors, not necessarily professional investors. I do have a lot of institutional folks on my newsletter, but I also have, hobbyists, high net worth investors. It's a little bit expensive. It costs $7.95 a year. So, it's usually for people who have some assets who like to trade and invest and stuff like that. So, the newsletter is kind of known for its literary quality. I'm really a professional writer. Also, forgot to mention that I got another degree last year. I got a master's in fine arts and creative writing
Hmm.
from the Savannah College of Art and Design. So,
Yeah, SCAD.
yep, SCAD.
Yep. I know, heard many things about SCAD over the years.
Yep.
Actually been there, so I don't know if you lay over there in Savannah. Um, so the Daily Dirt Nap was your first venture into the self-employed entrepreneurial world, right?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. Dirt Nap means, is that the same thing that the Dirt Nap means in the Marine Corps?
Yep, it is.
Okay. I was like, is this for military folks? The Daily Dirt Nap? Like, I wonder if they really know what he's talking about there. So yeah. Um, well, So you started writing the Daily Dirtnap, and then you've gotten into a number of other things. You've been on a number of financial shows, and had another show for there for a while, for a couple of years, early COVID, I guess. And now you also have the Be Smart podcast.
Yeah, I mean, the podcast, I mean, it's a good podcast. It's probably the least important thing that I do.
Hmm.
I actually had a radio show for a little while. From 19 to 21, I had a nationally syndicated radio show. It wasn't on a lot of stations. It was a pretty small show, but I had a show on personal finance. But really, I'm a writer. I write books. I write the newsletter. And the interesting thing about my books is the first book I published was a memoir. The second one was a novel. The third one was an essay collection. The fourth one was trade nonfiction. The fifth one is going to be a short story collection. So I've done all the genres, pretty much except for poetry. So,
Yeah, covered it all. Um, so what is you spending most of your time on? You're mostly involved in finance and personal finance.
yep, that's right. Yep.
Yeah. Now, do most of your books have anything to do with, are most of your books centered around finance?
Well, the most recent one is called No Worries: How to Live a Stress-Free Financial Life.
Hmm.
And that is a book that is done really, really well. It's sold a bunch. People love it. A lot of people in their 40s and 50s read it and they say, gosh, I wish I had this when I was in my 20s. So I encourage people to give it to their kids and their nieces and nephews. Like, it's really about, I mean, just like the title says, like how to live a stress-free financial life.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I hold that thought. Take a quick break. Be right back. All right, back talking with Coast Guard veteran Jared Dillian from the Daily Dirtnap and Be Smart podcast. And you also have your new book, No Worries: How to Live a Financial Stress-Free Financial Life. Right.
Yep.
Um, Tell us. All right. So, what are some of the big things in your book on basic principles on how to get your financial affairs in order?
Well, it's really there's a couple main points of the book, right? The source of all financial stress. There's two sources of financial stress. One of them is debt, and the other is risk. Okay. Debt is pretty self-explanatory. If you have a lot of credit card debt, student loan debt, it's going to stress you out. It's going to cause you a lot of stress. If you have a lot of risk in the financial markets, if you're trading crypto, if you're trading leveraged ETFs, if you're taking a lot of risk, you're going to be checking your phone every 5 minutes. That's going to cause you a lot of stress, right?
Yeah.
So I'm not saying necessarily that avoidance of all stress is necessarily a good thing because quite frankly, in order to succeed, you have to experience some stress.
Hmm.
But what I'm talking about is eliminating unnecessary financial stress. Okay.
Right.
And another point in the book, which is very important, is a lot of personal finance literature talks about this idea that it's a million small decisions that determine whether you have money. The whole thing about the coffee, like don't buy coffee on the way into work. Don't spend $4 on a coffee
Yeah.
because if you spend $4 on a coffee, that's $900 a year and $36,000 over 40 years. And if you invested it, you would have $100,000. So if you stop drinking coffee, you'll have $100,000, right?
Right.
So that is dumb, right? Because people like coffee, it gives them enjoyment, okay? And it's a small luxury.
Hmm.
But what's a better decision is if you're shopping for a house, get a house that's 300, 500 square feet smaller. Get a smaller house than you need. It's going to cost $100,000 less. You're going to spend $120,000 less in interest. So one decision has the same impact as thousands of decisions, right?
Hmm.
So it's really not about a million small decisions. It's about getting a few big things right. So the house, buying a house, buying a car, going to college, getting student loans. Those three things. If you get those three things right, then you don't have to worry about the little things.
Right. So, are you a pretty big advocate for home ownership?
I mean, not necessarily. Like, one thing that I get from people, people who are 27, 28, 29 years old, they're like, Jared, I don't feel like an adult because I don't own a house, Like
Right.
we like home ownership is kind of a cult in this country. We have a very high home ownership rate. It's about 66%.
Yeah.
And you don't necessarily need to own a house, especially because it like maybe 5 years ago it was a good idea, but now housing prices are so expensive that it's very hard to find a house where you're going to be paying less than 25% of your income in housing costs. So
Right.
you can rent, right? You can rent, and renting is not the worst thing in the world. It really isn't, as long as if you take the money you are saving and you are investing, then it's perfectly acceptable. So,
Right. And there's a big generation of people right now that have only seen the housing market go up. They were children when several times the housing market has totally collapsed or gone down. So the value of houses does not always necessarily go up.
yeah, I know that for a fact. I worked at Lehman Brothers.
You didn't know Tor O'Connell, did you? He was an old buddy of mine that worked at Lehman Brothers.
No, no.
Okay. Um, Shout out to Tor, one of my listeners. Anyways, so what are some of the other things in your book that you're trying to get across to people?
Well, I would say those are the main two, the big points. I mean, I go into detail on, financial instruments like credit cards and car loans and student loans and stuff like that. And I talk about something called the awesome portfolio, which is really the solution for people saving for retirement. It is the best combination of risk and return that you can possibly get. I don't want to go into the details, it's a little bit complicated, but this portfolio, which is made up of five things: stocks, bonds, gold, cash, and real estate. This portfolio returns 8.1% a year with half the volatility of the stock market. So you're getting 1% less in returns with half the volatility. That is the answer. Because for a lot of people, it's not so much, it doesn't really matter what you invest in. It's more important that you stay invested. And if you're in the stock market, over the course of a 40-year investing career, you're going to have a 50% drawdown, a couple of 20% drawdowns. And when you experience these drawdowns, it's going to cause you stress, and you might sell and liquidate your stocks, and then you're going to stop compounding, and that's when you lose. So the goal is to stay invested and keep compounding. And the way you do that is to build a portfolio with minimum volatility so you can manage your emotions.
Yeah, and this mix of five different things that you talk about, it's people doing that manually on their own. There's not like one fund you buy that's got all the right mix in it.
Well, I would like to launch that fund. I hope to do that someday, but
Uh-huh.
yeah, for now you have to do it on your own. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, and as far as funds invested in real estate, are you talking about like real estate investment trust, that kind of thing, or
Yeah,
just
yeah,
actual
yeah.
hard
I mean,
houses?
you can use the equity in your house as your real estate allocation, or you can buy REITs. You can do either. Yeah.
Hmm. Um, what do you what do you find most people are missing as far as personal investment, personal finance? Um, some people get really into it. Some people don't want to think about it at all. But typically, where do you find some of the big gaps are with people understanding investing?
Oh, there's huge gaps. I mean, like you said, there's a certain class of people that does not want to think about money at all.
Hmm.
That happens oftentimes in married couples. You have a husband and you have a wife, and a lot of times either the husband or the wife says, "Look, you're going to be responsible for the finances and I'm going to be responsible for something else. And I don't want to have anything to do with this. We are all responsible for our own financial education, right? We all have to take
Hmm.
responsibility. And for I, it's I learned about money when I was 23 years old, when I was in the Coast Guard. That's when I really started doing some research on it. If I didn't have this financial knowledge, it would be like not being able to read. It would be like going to the grocery store and not being able to read the cans of soup. You know, I
Hmm.
would be illiterate. Like I would be like operating in this world where everything is confusing because I can't read. That's what it's like when you don't have financial literacy. That's what everything is a mystery to you.
Hmm.
So that's one of this book. It's a very uncomplicated book. It's in plain language. It's easy for people to understand. It's not confusing. That's why I highly recommend picking up the book.
When you were 23 years old, early on in the Coast Guard, were there any books that you read back then that really opened up your eyes to personal finance?
Uh, well, the first book I ever read was A Random Walk Down Wall Street by
Huh.
Burton Malkiel,
Uh-huh.
which basically said that the markets were efficient and you couldn't beat the market. But I do a pretty good job of beating the market, so I think that's bogus. So
Yeah. You ever read any of the Charles Gibbons stuff back in the 90s and Robert Kiyosaki? He's still going.
yeah, I have. I mean, the funny thing about Kiyosaki's book, Rich Dad Poor Dad,
Uh-huh.
I would say the first half of that book, where he's talking about his two dads,
Right.
is magical. Like it is magical. It is a masterpiece.
Uh-huh.
But then when he starts going into passive income and buying laundromats and buying houses and going into debt and stuff like that, like this is the type of stuff that I try to get people to avoid, right? Because what Kiyosaki is doing is he's like, look, leverage up as much as you can, take out all these debt, buy these income producing assets, and that works, but that's like a game of musical chairs. If you have a recession, then the music stops and you're in trouble. And I think Kiyosaki himself has gotten into trouble doing this over the years. But
Hmm.
like I said, the first half of that book is genius, and the book is 30 years old and it's still in bookstores everywhere. It still sells. So
Yeah, you're right. That the first part where he, you his own dad, who's all about getting lots and lots of degrees and highly educated and stayed in the Hawaii education system, ended up with not really much money, at the end of his life. And his best friend's neighbor, the neighbor of his best friend's dad was always working for himself, just hacking away at it, owning basic things and doing all, but it was always in charge himself, and
yep.
ultimately built a pretty good empire of real estate and businesses in the Hawaii area and ended up with a lot of money. So just a different mentality, different attitude about things. Um, when you write a book, you're a writer now, but when you first started writing, were you able to just sit down and crank out a book? And I asked this question from the context of there's a lot of veterans. I always say there's probably a book inside of every veteran that gets out of the military, but most of us look upon the concept of writing a book as an arduous task. Like, what are some of the things, tactics, and techniques you use to actually crank out a book?
Well, I mean, the thing about books is if you're disciplined about which theoretically military people are, then it's not that hard. Like the average book is about 80,000 words, right?
Hmm.
So if you write 1,000 words a day, you'll be done in 80 days, less than 3 months. Let's say 3 months. You'll be done with the book in 3 months. You'll have a
Hmm.
draft. You'll have a draft. That's not that bad. But a lot of people don't have that daily discipline, right?
Hmm.
Because they feel like they have to have inspiration before they write. Okay.
Right.
But that's not really how it works. Like you don't get inspiration and then you write and then you get inspiration. The inspiration comes from the writing. So you really have to, like 9 a.m., sit down at your desk and write 1,000 words every day. And in 3 months, you're going to have a book. Now, I'm giving you this advice. I'm terrible at doing this. I really write books in spurts,
Yeah,
no worries. I wrote 2/3 of that book in 2 weeks. I wrote like 60,000 words in 2 weeks.
yeah. Just
It was
get in the
over a
groove.
Christmas break.
Uh-huh.
But I would really like to be more disciplined and just sit down and write 1,000 words a day. So,
Hmm. Yeah, well, most people that writing is one of those things. It's kind of an emotional outlet, and it's easy to think that, I got to be inspired for I sit down here and write. Because if you're writing off the top of your head, um, where's that stuff coming from if you're not really in the mood to be writing? So sometimes people built in a little bit of built in the structure of the book first, and then write to that, so they always know what they're trying to think about. But there's a lot of people that run their business that way too, though. They don't have the discipline to do the work even when they don't feel like doing the work,
yep,
and their business relies on the owner's emotions, and when they get inspired, when they get motivated, it's
yep.
the same problem. So in your experience in the financial world, um, what are some of the things you've learned over the years, like when you first got interested in finance and money and working on Wall Street? And when you first started all that, what were some of the preconceived notions you had, and some of the things you've learned, and maybe your opinions have changed on certain things over the years?
My God. So I remember when I was first learning about the stock market. Um, this was 25 years ago. So I was reading about listed trading and over the counter trading. And basically, it's different now. There's 17 different exchanges and it's electronic or whatever. But back then, you had the New York Stock Exchange and the NASDAQ, and the
Hmm.
NASDAQ was over the counter trading. So when I read this, I pictured like a counter and guys like handing out stock certificates over the counter.
Yeah.
Like that's what I thought it was, you know. So it's I don't know. I mean, I've been in finance for 25 years, and I learn stuff all the time. So
Yeah. Do you think if Lehman Brothers had survived, do you think you would still be working there and doing that, or would you have gone out on your own like you did?
I'd probably still be there, to my detriment. I mean, I would have made a lot of money, but that was a super stressful job. And I don't mean this to denigrate anybody in the military, what any of the things that people in the military do. I did a lot of stressful things in the Coast Guard. My job at Lehman Brothers was 10 times more stressful. It
Really?
was incredibly stressful. And that was kind of peculiar to what I was doing as an ETF trader in the 2000s. Like I was handling massive amounts of risk, and I mean, I'm 50 years old and I got gray hair, like I just like that job almost killed me. It was really tough. Now, having said that, having gone to a military academy and having served in the military, I think it prepared me well for that job. A lot of ETF traders back then would only last about 2 years, and I lasted 7 years, which
Wow.
was a lot. It's kind of like being a pro football player. So,
What were some of the surviving in the civilian world and running your own business now? What were some of the things that you think you learned in the military that still help you today?
um, really, it's about time management. I think that's the one thing that I got out of it that's really helped me. Um, I'm actually not the most disciplined person. I don't make my bed. I don't. I stopped doing that a long time ago. I was a pretty good. I shined my shoes for a long time, but I pretty much wear sneakers now all the time. But like but time management, like at a service academy, you are I mean, you're taking like 22 credits, you have activities, you have community service, you have all the military stuff, you have to take care of your uniform, you have to buff your deck, Like you have all this stuff that you have to manage in a 24-hour period.
Hmm.
And that is something that I've carried with me for the rest of my life, is how to get a lot of stuff done in a short period of time. That's what it
Yeah,
really trained me for. So
that's awesome. Well, so Jared, how do we find your book?
So the book is No Worries: How to Live a Stress-Free Financial Life. Highly, highly, highly recommend you get the book. It could change your life, really. So that's on Amazon, or it's in Barnes and Noble or any place. Also, I give military discounts to my newsletter. So if you
Awesome.
are an active trader or an active investor and you want to subscribe to the Daily Dirtnap, it costs $795. I give a military discount to $300.
Wow,
So you
awesome.
can subscribe for $300. So what you do is go to my website, dailydirtnap.com, hit the subscribe button, and it sends an email to me and just tell me that you listen to the podcast, and I'll give you the discount. So
Awesome. That's great. All right. Thanks, Jared. Appreciate that. I do want to give you the last word coming to the end of our time. If you're talking to somebody on their way out of the military, looking to start their own business, run their own show, what kind of advice comes to mind?
you got to be relentless. You got to be absolutely relentless, and you're in competition with people who have different experiences than you. You're in competition with people who have different attitudes towards risk. So you just got to be relentless.
Awesome. Great advice. Well, hey, Jared, thanks for sharing your entrepreneurial success story. Look forward to seeing your future success. And thanks for being here telling your story.
Thank you very much.
You bet. All right. These two veterans are Oscar Mike.